Dear viewers, I felt compelled in my heart to share something about competition. Competition. And this is a topic that is rarely discussed in Christian circles. But it's something that we go through daily as mortal beings. And I have selected 7 quotes from 7 different people who are not necessarily Christians. But these quotes, in my opinion, are the best quotes we have on competition, and they come from people who have made accomplishments in their respective lives. And one of the best quotes among the 7 is by one Idris Elba. Idris is an English actor, producer, musician, and DJ. He is a British of African descent, and he's born in 1972, so he's a young person. And he says, I'm an ambitious person. I never consider myself in competition with anyone. And I'm not saying that from an arrogant standpoint. It's just that my journey started so long ago. And I'm still on it, and I won't stand still. That's what he says. He says, I'm not competing with anyone because my journey started a long time ago. And I'm not going to stand still. He simply says, I keep on keeping on. And I seem to agree with him there. And James Altucher, who is an American venture capitalist, is a best-selling author, an entrepreneur, fund manager, and podcaster. He says about competition, your competition is not other people, but the time you kill, the ill will you create, the knowledge you neglect to learn, the connections you fail to build, the health you sacrifice along the path, your inability to generate ideas, the people around you who don't support and love your efforts, and whatever God you curse for your bad luck. He mentions those things and says those are your competition, which means, according to James Altucher, your competition is not a human being. They're those things that I've mentioned. And that was the second quote. And the third quote is from Albert Hubert, who is an American writer, publisher, artist, and philosopher. And Albert Hubert had this to say: do your work with your whole heart and you will succeed. There is so little competition. He talks about hard work. You do your work with your entire heart, the whole heart, and he says you'll succeed. And then he says there is very little competition at that sphere. And another one, the next one is from Simone Biles. And Simone Biles is actually 20 years, it's 20 or 21 right now. This is 2018, he was born in 1997. And he's a very successful gymnast. And she says, a successful competition for me is always going out there and putting 100% in whatever I'm doing. And it's not always winning. People, I think, mistake that it's just winning. Sometimes it could be, but for me, she says, it's hitting the best sets I can and gaining confidence and having a good time and having fun. That is competition according to her, just working hard, gaining confidence, having a good time and having fun. Loving what you do. That is according to Simone Biles. And the fifth one was by Washington Alston. He's a painter and author. He was. I think he must have passed on. Maybe he's still around, I'm not so sure. The only competition worthy of a wise man is with himself. He says that wise people compete against themselves. And he says that is the only competition worthy, which means we have some competitions that are unworthy, but the worthy competition is just competing against yourself. And somebody else, Roger Waters, he's an English writer, bassist and composer, he's a musician. And Roger Waters says, I'm in competition with myself and I'm losing. He is competing with himself and he says, I'm losing. That's true. We compete even against ourselves, and we find ourselves failing. And we who read the Bible, in Romans chapter 7, Paul says the same thing. He says, the spirit is willing, but there is warfare between the spirit and the body. And I find myself being pushed aside by the body. And he says, oh, wretched man. He calls himself wretched. He says, I'm a wretched man. Who shall deliver me out of this body of death? And there is hope in Romans 8, where he begins by saying, and now there is no condemnation to them who are called. But he seems to agree with Roger Waters here, that competing against the self is sometimes self-defeating. It is sometimes very difficult because we are the first enemies of ourselves, and we fail, and we've fallen miserably as human beings, and that is why we need Jesus to rescue us from wickedness and from pain, from sin. We need Christ because we have failed trying to wrestle against ourselves in a legalistic way. Legalism will tell you to be obedient, to always work so hard and all that. But we see people who really do that ending up being hypocrites. They fail miserably, and they strive so hard and it doesn't work, then they fail miserably. But the best of them all, in my opinion, is one quote from FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, my favorite president, American president. He says, competition has been shown to be useful up to a certain point and no further. It has been useful, it has been shown to be useful to a certain point, and it doesn't exceed that. And he says, but cooperation, which is the thing we must strive for today, begins where competition leaves off. He has put, and that's why he's the best, that's the best quote, in my opinion, is because he has put in his quote, competition and cooperation. Competition and cooperation. And he says, competition is only okay. It's only useful to a given level. Thereafter, it loses the luster. It can sustain itself. It fails at a given, at some point. And I think science, because science has really been a proponent of competition, and we get, in the origin of species, we get Charles Darwin philosophizing and theorizing about survival for the fittest. And he says natural selection and there's survival for the fittest and all that. And really looking at that he talks about, that analogy or that theory is only applicable to the wild, in the jungle. Over time, human society or the human race realize realized that they can do better with cooperating than competing. And in the animal kingdom, I live in Africa and we have animals here and we have the wild. So sometimes we go there and we see what happens. And in the wild, it's about survival for the fittest. It's competition that sustains the ecosystem. This one feasting upon that one and that one feasting upon the other one. And they form a food chain. And through that food chain, we know where the wild is. They can't be compared to human beings because they can't cooperate. There is some element of cooperation among lions and elephants, but we beat them. We beat the animal kingdom because we cooperate. And so, as human beings and living in our contemporary times, and especially now I'm addressing those of us who call themselves Christians. And I think I'm going to put this in a different clip so that we can really understand what the Spirit is telling me about this subject of competition. Because I feel pregnant, I feel we need to hear something about competition because we have lost it as Christians. Because we don't understand the essence and the extent of competition. And so we are engulfed in warfare that is needless. We're fighting things we're not supposed to be fighting. Instead of focusing on higher things, we find ourselves demeaning our nature and not exercising our potentials because we are lowering our standards and competing with things we are not even supposed to be competing with. And I'm going to discuss that in the next clip, so stay tuned and let us see what the Spirit is telling us today.